Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Myth Salon. Well, today I have the distinct honor of bringing one of my longtime friends and working colleagues, Dr. Gard Jameson, in to talk about the Enneagram. And I've known Gard with the Enneagram for more than 20 years, and the thing that occurs to me is that we're all looking for some path to self-awareness. Self-awareness is going to open us up to the divine nature of existence, the cosmos. It'll allow us to form relationships. But if we don't know who we are, we've got a long road, and we can deal with all kinds of issues, but we need to have a lens through which to understand our personality and the personalities of other people. So before I begin, what I want to do is I want to open it up and start with a moment of silence. All right. Well, wherever you are, I'm really glad you're joining us today because it's a very special day. And I want to read this poem that I found. Didn't find it, but it's called Filters. As I ponder how to unravel my identity from the oneness that contains me, I enter the strangely shaped shard that is myself. The ancients remind me there is wisdom in knowing oneself. So I launch into the journey by leaving home, an orphan broken from mother. Pieces of everything have been captured in me. The filters of my separate self evolve according to my nature and my encounters with the road. Down this strand, I am a number. Down another path, I am a character. Unresolved fragments of an aliveness fabricating my destiny into particular ways of being. I could have been a fish, a tree, a turtle, a flower, a stone. Everything is life. I could have been nurtured by earth or air, by fire or water. In time, I realize what is my soul food by letting my essence come forth. I am located by place and time in the migratory nature of endlessly changing liminal zones. Still, illusions of being human sever me from the oneness of being. Not this, not that. Who am I to form these apparent separations? Who am I to wrest myself from the flow of the one and everything? I stitch myself back into the whole according to patterns of meaning and love. Everything has an expiration date. Only existence is eternal. So, why don't we go forth? Let me introduce my good friend, Gard Jameson, and let's see what we have in store for us today with the Enneagram. Gard?
Thank you, Dana. Will, always good to see you and be with you, my friend. And
Great to see you.
I want to thank my dear sister, Carol Schindler, who is an extraordinary person who I've known for, I think, 30, 40 years. And my new friend, Meghann McNiff, who I know through a mutual friend in Seattle. And she's an extraordinary person who has an extraordinary story. So welcome to this Myth Salon on the Enneagram. I believe in my personal journey, the Enneagram has been probably in the top 5 in terms of the most important discoveries in my own journey. Without the Enneagram, I would be a very different person because it's allowed self-awareness. It's also allowed awareness of others. Ever since I was a child, I've been fascinated by the word personality and knowing that it comes from the Latin, which means a mask, and that we all carry masks or identities through this journey of life. And to begin to understand what the features of that mask are, and to realize that sometimes the mask is a mask of comedy, which brings a quality of love and compassion and hope. And sometimes it's a mask of tragedy, which brings despair and distress and trauma. But nevertheless, we carry this mask. And I have really been blessed in exploring this territory and exploring the archetypal energy. And I use that word. I took my degree with Dana at Pacifica. I use that word very purposefully because there's an archetypal energy here that was identified by Gurdjieff and others. And it's a very powerful energetic field, which is unique to each of us, but which follows pattern. And what I've discovered is that personality follows type. And Dr. Jung, as we all know, discovered this after his break with Freud, that typology is really important in the journey of self-awareness and other awareness. So as a young man, I read Martin Buber's I and Thou, and I really wanted to understand how to amplify the thou-ness in others and in myself. As a young man, I read his Tales of the Hasidic Masters, and I saw these incredible personalities engaging in community. So what Enneagram has taught me is that we are part of a field of energy which begins with our personal selves, but extends to our families, and then extends to our community, then extends to our political identifications, and then extends to the whole planet. And what the Enneagram does is to free us from any tribal identities, free us from any attachments to any of those identities, to help us realize that we're cosmic citizens. We're citizens of the planet. And my teacher, Thomas Berry, said in his description of the cosmogenetic principle, there are really only three principles that govern the entire universe: unity, diversity, and growth. Or we could use on this episode, individuation. And that we're all part of a journey in which we're exploring our unity together and our diversity at the same time, because it's the other side of the coin. And as we do that, we experience a quality of individuation or growth. And so it's a three-dimensional world that we're living in. I was fascinated early on, while I was a graduate student, to study that Dr. King, Martin Luther King Jr., had studied at Boston University and had studied a school called the Personalists. And the Personalists represent a group of individuals. John Paul II was a student of this school, a group of individuals who believe that the sort of orchestra leader of our lives is personality. And the more we can understand personality, the more the symphony, if you will, the diversity of tones in our life come together in threads, which make a beautiful pattern. The more we can understand those patterns, the more we can create a quality of compassion for everybody around us, most especially our family members. And the more we understand those patterns, those archetypal energies, the more we can feel for everybody on this planet. As Philo of Alexandria said, once we understand what each of us is carrying in our bags, the only possible response is compassion. So this journey began back in the 90s with a Franciscan monk by the name of Richard Rohr. I went to seminars, I learned about the Enneagram, and then I met a couple of very interesting fellows, Don Rizzo and Russ Hudson. Went to a workshop, a facilitator workshop in Woodstock, New York, where we did holotropic breathing. I don't know if any of you have done holotropic breathing, but it was wild. As I saw underneath those masks, the quality of trauma, the quality of despair that 60-some people in the room expressed. And so what I know from my journey is that joy is inherent in human existence. And so the discovery of joy begins with self-discovery and discovery of the other. There's a wonderful movie called Field of Dreams, which I'm sure many of you have seen, with Kevin Costner. And what I will share with you is that in the exploration of the Enneagram, I discovered the archetypal energy of each of my siblings and my parents. And you may recall the last scene in the Field of Dreams, where the young man is embraced by his father. And that was exactly my experience as I realized who my father was energetically, archetypally, and I realized the limitations associated with that energy, and I realized the gifts. And I saw those gifts in him, and I was so grateful. I saw the limitations, and I felt compassion for him, my mother, my siblings, and myself. So I welcome you this evening to this journey, and I'm going to share with you just 3 simple slides to underscore a couple of points that I've just made. So you can see the first is, and many of you I'm sure are familiar with these archetypal energies. I myself am a 9 with a 1 wing, which means when you put those together, the philosopher. And so I have the privilege of teaching philosophy at the University of Nevada. But as I explored this wheel of personality, as I began to discover my older brother, the 8, my younger sister, the 7, my older sister, the 6, my father, the 3, and my mother, the 1, I began to realize why, if it was a 12 o'clock lunch and I was there at 12:15, why my mother was a little angry with me, because she carries a quality of perfectionism. And again, when we see those things, sometimes we weep, but oftentimes we can actually giggle. And I choose to giggle when I see that kind of behavior, that reactive behavior. But again, the Enneagram gives us the opportunity to break the chains of that reactive behavior by realizing that underneath the mask, there's a more essential nature to each of us, a deeper quality of personality, which unifies all of us. It brings the diversity together. So I'm going to carry you to the next slide. I'm going to let my friend Carol and Meghann give you a little more elaboration, perhaps on the archetypal energies. But this slide is meant to show you that each of us is 3-dimensional. And Carol's going to talk about this as well, that we have a vertical dimension to our personality, which is the dimension of unity, which is where we engage a kind of spiritual communion with something larger than ourselves. And when we do that, we discover a kind of infusion. Thomas Aquinas called it a divine infusion. And it's from that, Lao Tzu said the same thing, it's from that infusion that character emerges and allows us to become who we were intended to be. And then there's a horizontal dimension, which is our moral engagement. It's our moral connection to others. And it helps us to appreciate the diversity. And this is why Enneagram is so very important, because it helps us to realize, like the Field of Dreams, that you wouldn't want the pitcher to be the catcher, or the catcher to be the first baseman, or the first baseman to be the shortstop. We each have our gifts. We each have our limitations. And so the divine, and however you imagine that word, the divine has fielded a team. And what we are called to do is to bring together a container. Build it and they will come. To bring together a container in which all of these various personalities can come to the field, both the introverts and the extroverts. God bless the extroverts. I'm an introvert, INFJ. Everybody is supposed to be on the field. And when we recognize that, we have a synergy, a synchronicity, and a serendipity unbelievable, absolutely miraculous in character. And what we discover, like Odysseus and so many of the hero stories, that when we bring that quality of spiritual attainment or engagement and moral engagement, moral insight together through a quality of unselfish service, we engage the journey, the hero's journey. And we are given a quality of resilience, which allows us to deal with the tragedy, with the distress, the despair, the trauma that we all experience, and gives us the ability to begin to see what it is we're here on planet Earth to do. What is the gift that we're here to bring? So I'm going to show you one more slide, I think. And this is from my friend who I met in 1993, Wayne Teasdale, who wrote A Monk in the World and the Mystic Heart. But he talks about 9 elements of a universal spirituality. He worked with Thomas Keating, Richard Rohr, and many others to develop this list. But they represent both moral practices, moral awarenesses, and spiritual practices. And when we bring these 2 dimensions together in our personality, we begin to discover just an amazing journey that we've each been invited to. And that's why, for me, the Enneagram is absolutely an essential tool for our journey forward. So with that, I am going to turn to my dear sister, Meghann, who's up in Canada. I'll just say briefly that Meghann is an amazing person. She's an integral coach. She is very well steeped in the Enneagram work. She is former military, which trained her and prepared her to be a mother. She has, how many kids do you have, Meghann? 2. And they've been up there in Canada skiing on the slopes. And so her knees may be a little wobbly, but her heart is gold. So Meghann, take it away.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here with you all tonight. My family was off skiing in the woods today, and I'm definitely feeling my knees. That's for sure. I have a 5 and a 7-year-old, and they're quite good. They were a lot to keep up with today. So Gard introduced a little bit there. I'm an integral professional coach. I work with individuals and with teams. And similarly, I have a passion for the Enneagram because it keeps helping. It's been profound in my own journey, and it continues to be profound with the teams and individuals I work with. It's just continually helpful. So I keep using it and keep studying it. I've been working with it for about 10 years now, intensely, and I'm still learning. I also love that about it. So for my own journey, as Gard said, I started my career in the Air Force. My father was a fighter pilot in Vietnam. And I was an easy sell to go to the Air Force Academy because it sounded fun and I wanted to play soccer. And this will all make more sense when I tell you my Enneatype. And then I was stationed at an F-16 squadron in Italy, and I was 23. And then I realized that we were putting live bombs on these airplanes that I was having fun flying in, right? And I had this sort of consciousness awakening moment of realizing that isn't what I wanted to do. That isn't how I wanted to participate in the world. And having grown up with a father who was a fighter pilot in Vietnam, these stories of honor and helping each other, and which is all true, was only one side. And that was the side I really liked. And so then there was this moment of coming to reality, a sober awakening. And then I tried to transition my commitment to the Air Force to join the Peace Corps, which didn't work, but planted a seed for me. And I completed my 5 years in the Air Force. I was in program management and organizational development. And then I got a master's of public health and I moved to Afghanistan. And I worked there for 8 years, largely with in public health realm with midwives. And that led me to discover integral coaching, because after 8 years of living and working in Afghanistan, I burnt out. When things were harder, all I knew how to do was push harder. And when I received integral coaching, I discovered that I had no capacity to be with my grief. And that was absolutely, crushing me, running from my grief and continually trying to make good things happen and focus on the positive. And that, of course, was very overwhelming, but also unlocked a lot in my life. And so I'm going to start right there when I share my slides here. So I work with myself as a type 7. And when we look at the Enneagram, the first step, the most simple piece is that there's 9 types, and each one has a core motivation. So the behaviors might look similar, but really the motivation underneath it is where we really connect with the power of this lens, of this tool. And so as a type 7, I have to experience it all and avoid pain. I want to live life fully and not ever feel pain, which of course is a strategy that's going to lead us in a circle, because half of life might be fun and the other half of life is going to be painful. So we can't really live fully until we're able to host all of that. So that's our type 7. And then I'll just go around the wheel here. And if it's fun, if you want to, in the chat, maybe any archetypes that come to you as you're hearing me in these core motivations. So the 8 is sometimes called the active controller. The motivation of the type 8 is to be in control, to be strong, sometimes described as to avoid vulnerability. This is the person that is very protective of other people. Sometimes this is like the mother bear or papa bear, and also can be quite aggressive, quite abrasive. And the life's work of the 8 is to learn how to be with their impact on other people and to be with the power of their own heart, to have the bravery to be vulnerable in that way, and then have their power be received easier. The 9 is our peacemaker. This motivation is about harmony, balance. Gard, can I share that you're a type 9? Did you already say that?
Yeah, but we also like to procrastinate, and I was a little late to the meeting today.
So sometimes with the 9, this is the term that's sometimes used is about the holy anger. This way that 9s can be really laid back. They can sort of go to sleep to themselves in a way of avoiding disharmony. They're really dedicated to the peace and the harmony. Beautiful, lovely people to be around. But then that sort of, they're losing themselves. That holy anger can wake them up to be able to take action and not be so afraid of losing the harmony. And then our type 1s are really committed to doing the good and right thing. This is the person that's really oriented to the structure, like Gard was mentioning with his mother about being on time. And then, of course, right, all of this is sort of the Achilles heel is right there, sort of, well, right according to whom? And so the life's work and the journey of the 1 is really coming to this understanding of good enough and sort of the perfection and the imperfection. And then the type 2 is motivated by being liked, being connected, being in harmony with others, being appreciated. And the life's work of the 2 is bringing themselves and their own needs equally with other people's needs. They're often have the superpower of being able to know what people want and need before they're asked. And that's another part of the life's work of the 2 is recognizing that we still should ask even if we know. And then our type 3s their superpower is knowing the metrics of success. They want to be the best. They are the best. They can just know what the metrics are of success in any given circumstance. And then the life's work of the 3 is about connecting with their heart and their authenticity and trusting that they don't have to forego that what they want and what they believe is true to just sort of succeed for succeed's sake and become more authentic and connected with themselves as they do that. And the motivation of the 4 is to be unique and authentic. And the 4s live in sort of the emotional depths, and they live in the deep water of emotion. They can sometimes get stuck there. So the life's work of the 4 is really about connecting with the authenticity that we all have, the unique snowflakeness of all of us. And then the 5s are researchers. They're really motivated to understand. And they can sometimes, like Gard was saying, where the 9 sort of is falling asleep to themselves, the 5s can sort of get stuck in needing to know more, needing to know more, needing to know more. And when the 5 really integrates, they have a lot of wisdom to share. And then the 6s, this is the archetype of the person who's scanning for safety. They're very concerned. Their primary orientation is about having safety, and safety through belonging sometimes. And so the 6, when we integrate through this lens of the 6, there's really a lot of courage that comes online. And there's sort of this inspirational leadership of a 6 when they have scanned for all the threats and they're willing to do it anyway with all that courage. They're very trustworthy. So there's our 9 core motivations. And then I won't go through all of this, but I just want to say that so the first lens is the core motivation of all the 9 types. And then when we layer in this instinct, there's 3 instincts for each types. So then we come with 27 that's more specific, more precise, more nuanced. And in my experience, this is where we really catch our patterns. So we'll just go through this quickly. The 3 instincts, so every type has 3 instincts. So the first is somebody who's really oriented to one-to-one connection, intense experiences, intense connections. The self-preservation instinct about material security, staying safe. And then the social instinct, which is concerned with the dynamics in the group and oriented in that way. So then when we layer these 2 together, the 9 types become 27 types. And then here's just some more resources that will be available in the slides. And I really look forward to any question and answer period, and I'll pass it over to Carol there.
Yeah, let me introduce Carol. Carol is, as I said, 40 years I've known Carol, and she's one of the most extraordinary people in my life. We do a lot of spiritual retreats together. She's a communications coach. She trained in Chicago with Robin Williams. I bring her to Compassionate Las Vegas every year to provide improv training because I believe the yes and technique in communication is really the way to a win-win relationship with another person. And so, Carol, you are just a dear person and had a lot of experience with this, and you and Meghann share something in common.
Yes, we do. I think it's very odd that 2 7s would be here. I rarely meet another 7, to tell you the truth, that I'm doing Enneagram work, but here we are. Meghann and I are both 7s. But my path and journey was very different because I went into comedy. I did improvisational comedy in New York City for many, many, many years.
Did you ever drop bombs?
I never dropped a bomb. Well, actually, I bombed.
A comedy
I
bomb.
bombed, yes. You can't do improv without bombing, let me tell you that. So, but it was very much me running away from wanting to face any of my deep fears, any of my sadness, any of my deep emotional pain, which we all have, of course, because none of us escaped childhood without some deep emotional pain, no matter how wonderful our parents were. And so I pushed that all down and just did comedy, and did it with all of my energy and all of my heart. And on stage, I was absolutely fearless. I don't know how I got that, but I was fearless on stage, but not so much off stage. Off stage, I was filled with 7s tend to be a little anxious and fearful because we're in the thinking triad, by the way, the thinking centers, and so I was not that brave when I was off stage, and it's been quite a journey. to learn to accept my full self, which includes all of my warts, as well as all of my beautiful gifts that I've been blessed with. But Gard has tasked me with talking about the spiritual dimension of the Enneagram. So I'm going to share my screen. I thought it might be really helpful for you to understand a little bit about what the symbol of the Enneagram means, because it is quite profound. The definition, Ennea means 9, and gram is the process, really, or symbol, as it says here, but it's really process. First of all, it's an ancient symbol. They figure it's about 2,500 years old, and the origin of it is really unknown. Some people say the Sufis, some people say the Greeks, the classic Greeks. Some people say it came from Babylonia. It is really unknown, the origin of it, but it has been around for about 2,500 years. But it was brought to the 20th century by Gurdjieff. And for those of you who know a little bit about Gurdjieff, he was an Armenian philosopher who brought the Enneagram and many other wonderful principles to our attention. He was part of the Seekers After Truth, the SAT. So he traveled the world looking for esoteric information so that he could pass that on. And while he was doing all that research, he found the Enneagram and brought it and studied it. And actually he was a dance teacher because he taught the Enneagram through dancing. And if any of you know anything about the Gurdjieff work, you know that they're big on movement and dancing and all that kind of integration. But he said that the Enneagram is a symbol of perpetual motion that contains within it 3 divine laws. And the 3 divine laws are, number 1, the circle of the Enneagram. You can see here that obviously everything is contained within that circle. And that's the law of 1. And here we're talking that God is 1. We're talking unity here and wholeness. So that is what the circle represents. The triangle, which you can see is the 9, the 3, and the 6. You can see it kind of outlined, and especially on that bottom symbol there. The law of 3 is also the law of world creation. And this is how the world and the cosmos was created, through the law of 3. In every new arising, there are 3 forces of energy, and they are affirming, denying, and reconciling. And all 3 of those are needed. And when they operate together, then a 4th dimension appears. And this is how everything is created. This is the interweaving of the 3 produces the 4th. And it's not a continuation of a sequence, but it's a whole new level. A whole new dimension is what is created. And a simple way to understand it, and this is very simplistic because this is complex and you can study it. People study the law of 3 for their lives. But if you take a seed and you plant it in the earth, that's affirming and denying. And then when the sun comes in, that's the reconciling force. And then the result of that is a plant. And the plant is a new dimension. It's not the earth, it's not the seed, it's not the sun, it's something entirely new. So that's the law of 3. That's how the universe and everything got here. And then there's the law of 7, which is the hexad. And the hexad is the 1, 4, 2, 5, 8, 7. You can see those lines in the Enneagram. And the lines of the Enneagram is a whole study in itself, but we're not going to get into that today. And the law of 7 is process and development over time. So everything is always changing. It's evolving or it's devolving. And this is what the law of 7 is about. And the law of 7, you can actually track your life on the law of 7. And then there's these stress points where you make a choice to either grow or not grow. But this is so the symbol of the Enneagram is this wonderful symbol of perpetual motion that has within it these 3 divine laws. And this is a wonderful study if you should fancy yourself to study it. But then there's the Enneagram of personality, which is not the original Enneagram that Gurdjieff brought to us. And I'll tell you what this is about. the Enneagram, in 1950, there was a man who was a philosopher, Oscar Ichazo. He was a philosopher, and where was he from? Yeah, South America somewhere. And he brought he studied the Enneagram of personality, or he brought the Enneagram of personality to the Enneagram. And how he did this was he looked at the 9 divine attributes of humanity, and also the 7 deadly sins. And he brought these 2 together and said, you know, there's something here about self-realization and about ego fixation and about the mystics. And he said, why don't I lay this information on top of the Enneagram and see what happens? And hence the Enneagram of personality developed. There was also so the 9 attributes and the 7 deadly sins, and then we have the Enneagram for self-realization. Now, Claudio Naranjo went to study with Oscar Ichazo in South America, along with a lot of Jesuits, by the way. That's how the Catholic Church really got into the Enneagram. And he was a psychiatrist, and he looked at the Enneagram and the psychiatric diagnoses and said, oh, there's something here also. And so together, he brought psychology and spirituality to the Enneagram. And they laid this piece on top of the Enneagram that Gurdjieff had brought to us. And the Gurdjieff people are not very happy with the Enneagram of personality, but yet the Enneagram of personality is a really profound tool, and it really worked. It worked so well that that people began to have, and all of us here can testify this, we've all had tremendous movement in our lives, understanding in our lives, and growth in our lives from using the Enneagram of personality. The Enneagram of personality, according to Cynthia Bourgeot, who is a wonderful teacher, is a felicitous hitchhiker on the back of a powerful cosmic law. So that's a really brief history of the Enneagram symbol and how the Enneagram symbol and the Enneagram of personality work together. The heart of the Enneagram is the universal insight that human beings are a spiritual presence in a material body. Beneath all of our differences is the light of divinity that shines in every individual. So as Gard had showed you the vertical and the horizontal lines, we have our human experience, and then we have this divine experience. And the 2 of them connect and meet in the center. And in the center is where that personality that Gard had talked about, that's where that's where the 2 of them meet. And it's a personality that we all have. And the horizontal line is a personality with all of its patterns, where we all get stuck, where we get stuck in that box, where we can become very mechanical. But then when our personality meets that divine line, like in the center there, then something else begins to happen to us. And that is the nexus of the personality, where the divine meets the human experience. And as Gard so beautifully already told us, that is where we have the opportunity to grow and to change and to follow our divine leading, which all of us seem to have, even those of us who don't recognize it as being divine. We all have a sense that there's something larger, more beautiful, more wonderful toward us. And that's why we can become generous. That's why we long to be of service to other people. It's that wonderful drive within us that doesn't come from an animal, from the animal instincts, but comes rather from this divine sense that we all have. That's what the personality is all about. The vertical line is that inner dimension. The personality is transformed then, and it transcends all of the things in our human experience and opens up the door to possibility, to creativity, to hope, to elegance. It's quite beautiful. And that's where the opportunity lies. So when we work with the Enneagram, we come to an understanding of where we are stuck in our human experience, because the Enneagram doesn't put you in a box, it helps you out of that box. And then we have the opportunity to begin to transcend and grow on another level. So the Enneagram, if you read an Enneagram book, and by the way, Gard showed you this a little bit. This is the wisdom of the Enneagram. This was written by Russ Hudson and Don Rizzo, and they were my teachers. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. If any of you are looking for an introduction to the Enneagram, this is it. They talk in there about our essential nature, and I just put down here other names. Essential nature. You don't have to call it God. You can call it your true nature, your spirit. You can call it God within us. You can call it presence, that presence that we have in the present moment, and you can also call it the ground of your being. All of those things are essential nature. I just put a brief introduction of spirituality. It's the process of becoming progressively more conscious of and in touch with your own inner nature. And this is where the journey gets fun, because for a lot of us, we don't even realize we have an inner nature, especially for those of us, we sevens have no sense of inner guidance. We tend to have lost that sense of inner guidance. So when we can become in tune with that there is something larger and bigger in us that is guiding us, that's when our lives begins to really take off and things become quite beautiful. What happens to us is that we start off as these beautiful children who are open and wonderful and available, and then we have what they call the primal catastrophe, where our soul suffers an intolerable loss. So you can imagine if you are a 9 and you're full of peace and joy, and you lose that, you have your own personal freak out. For 7s, we lose our sense of security. And so, and we don't know, and our sense of guidance. And that's our own personal freak out. Then we lose that touch with that, and then all hell breaks loose. And we try to find a way of coping. And here is how we cope. This is the pattern of how all Enneagram types cope. And it's this 9. If you follow the triangle, this is where it is. So we lose contact with our true nature. That happens very at the top with the 9, right? At point 9, we all fall asleep. This is all of us. And then our ego starts to form. When we fall asleep, we freak out. And then we go to point 3 and we form a false identity, because 3s are all about that identity, right? So we freak out, we fall asleep, then we try to find a false identity. Who am I? What am I all about? And, we try to make up for this loss, this primal catastrophe that we've had. And then at point 6, we form a strategy to try to live our lives, right? Like as we talked about with the 9, we want to ignore the bad stuff and only go toward the good stuff. We don't want to face our pain. We want to push on, push everything else down, and move forward without dealing with the reality of who and what we are in the immediacy of each moment. And so we struggle. And when our strategies fail, we go back to 9 to try to find our presence again, and then the whole circle starts again, 1, 2, 3, 4, going round and around and around and around, and we get stuck in this pattern. How to stop that pattern? First of all, the desire to stop it, the awareness that we are stuck and that we want to stop it. Then we start to catch ourselves in the act and go, oh my gosh, I am this way. Damn. And then we have a contemplative practice. And the contemplative practice can be any form of contemplation that you might fancy. I particularly am a meditator. I do centering prayer, and I've had a practice of centering prayer for more than 30 years, and it has saved my butt. I will tell you this. Russ Hudson and Don Rizzo tell us that to get the full benefit of the Enneagram, one must integrate into a genuine spiritual practice. So whatever spiritual practice, whatever contemplative practice you fancy, that is good enough to help you through this. But the psychological integration and the spiritual realization are not separate processes. And I think that's the most important thing to realize about the spiritual dimension of the Enneagram, is that they go together. They're not separate. You have to have them both. You have to have that psychological understanding of where you are. And the Enneagram helps you with that 100%. And then you have to have the spiritual realization that we are all divine beings and we have all that we need to make a journey into that realm. So that is basically it. And I've talked very fast and I went through this quickly. So I'm hoping that you'll have questions about all of this. But that's kind of the pattern of how we get stuck and how any spiritual practice helps us in our journey. But one thing I wanted to show you, and I'm just going to put this up there so that you can see it, is that each of the 9 types has a path to transformation. And I'm not even going to read these, but I'm going to put them up so that you can see them. I can tell you that for the 7, the path of gratitude really is the way. I mean, once gratitude started to enter my life, that's when things really changed for me. And so I really relate to that path of gratitude. And perhaps as you look through these and you know what your type is, maybe you do, maybe you don't, you can find that you relate to one of these paths. And if you don't know your type yet, you might look at one of these paths and go, oh yeah, I think I am on the path to forgiveness, or I'm on the path of self-surrender, or the path of self-remembering. But, so it's a wonderful, beautiful journey, and I'll stop now. I've talked way too long, but I wanted to give you kind of that history of what the Enneagram, how it, where it came from, what it's about, and then how the Enneagram personality works in tandem with that. So I'll throw it back to you, Gard or Dana.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carol. Thank you very much, Meghann. Both incredibly wonderful and complimentary sharings. We did get a question from Eric, and he said, you know, where's the humility in all this? And that's a really good question.
Yes.
Because as my teachers, Russ and Don, say, you know, this is medicine. And like any medicine, it can be poison if it's not treated correctly. And so when we start to typecast people, when we start to put them in boxes, we are creating a poison. We're creating a separation between us and the other. And really what the Enneagram is meant to do is to teach us about the box we were born into. And again, this is genetic. We're born into this typology. It develops over time, but it gives us an opportunity to liberate ourselves from the box that we're born into, and to see the team, the field of dreams, to see the team coming out of the corn stalks, I think they were, and to celebrate the diversity of personality typology, which is really extraordinary. So again, Carol, thank you so much. And Meghann, so I want to ask a question. You said 7 deadly sins and 9 passions. I'm an accountant. I'm a CPA. 9 minus 7 is 2. What are those other 2? Where are they? What are the passions? What are the deadly sins? I think most of us know some of those.
Well, we have gluttony and sloth.
Yeah, well, 9s are sloths. 7s carry a certain gluttony. Would you say yes, Meghann, to that?
Yeah. Another lens is sort of this, each type has sort of the vice to virtue. So we've been talking a lot about 7. So the vice of the 7 is gluttony, being drawn towards things that are going to feel good and make me feel good.
Yeah.
And then the virtue is described as sobriety, being awake to all of reality. The word I prefer, the one that feels better, is freedom. There's a freedom in being sober with reality.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And Russ Hudson told the story at Woodstock. He said, the origin of the 7 deadly sins, I think, Carol, you may know this story, but there was a monk, Evagrius Ponticus, who came to Pope Gregory, who was at the Vatican, and he said, there are 9 sort of qualities that keep us away from experiencing our oneness with reality. And so he named the 9, and I'll just sort of briefly go through those. So first is anger, the 1. 2 is pride.
Pride, yeah.
3 is a quality of self-deceit. 4 is a quality of envy. 5 is a quality of greed. 6 is a quality of fear. 7, as Meghann said, is a quality of gluttony. 8 is a quality of lust, which doesn't mean necessarily sexual lust. My brother's an 8. He says, if I've got 2 options, I take them both, right? It's lust for life, is Zorba the Greek. And 9, it's a quality of sloth, or what's called acedia, which causes us to sort of withdraw and lock the door, go under the covers and say, to hell with all of you. I'm going to not deal with this. It's forgetting. So what happened was Pope Gregory went through the list as the Pope, infallible Pope, and he said, well, I can agree with 7 of these, but there are 2 that I do not agree with. And Carol, which 2 did he not agree with?
I do not know.
He did not agree with fear, and he did not agree with self-deceit. And now I bring in Dr. Freud. So Dr. Freud suggested what you repress will come back to haunt you, right, Will? And so again, as an institution, I don't mean to step on any toes, but I do have a friend who worked in the victims abuse office at the local diocese, and she was told, you will never, ever say I'm sorry to the victims of pedophilia. That I might call self-deceit. And I also might draw in the quality of fear. So again, what we realize is we're waking up to what's holding us back from being our authentic selves. And as we're aware of that, we're developing practices or competencies along the spiritual or vertical and along the horizontal or social or moral plane. And in developing those competencies, we create resilience to those passions, which I've been at this for 40 years and they still pop up. I still have that temptation to lock the door and go under the covers. So any other thoughts, Carol? Or
I will say one thing about humility, because that was the first question. When you discover your Enneagram type, humility is the only response, because you're caught, you're exposed, you see yourself for exactly what you are. And that is as a cause of great humility, when you realize how you have been blind or how you have ignored. For me, it was the extent of my selfishness that really hit me and blindsided me and caused great humility. So I think that that's where that comes in, is the honesty of where you are, how long of a journey you have to get to heal yourself, and in laïsm with God, all things are possible. And so I think that that's what prevents us from becoming full of despair, is that we can see ourselves and the truth of ourselves. And the truth is not always pretty. There are the gifts of the Enneagram, which are beautiful, but then there's that dark side, which all of us have to face in one way or another. So that's where that humility really hits you hard. And then slowly, beautifully, perfectly, as you work with God through a contemplative practice, you're able to face the truth. And you're able to, for me, I felt safe then, because it helped me to trust more. And as I felt safe, I was able to look at my own personality flaws and say, all right, I'm human. Let me find a way of slowly working through this, because it does not happen quickly. But I think that humility is a huge piece of this. And there's no way of getting forward without it.
Humility is the first button on the shirt. You get the first button right, the shirt goes down well.
Yeah.
You don't have
You know-
humility, the shirt is awkward. Will?
Well, and that's why, of course, looking at the 7 deadly sins, pride is the cardinal sin.
Mhm.
And also, when we look at the 7 deadly sins, you find all these parallels around the world. The Buddhist 5 hindrances, the Hindu Vargas, the Taoist excesses, et cetera, et cetera. There are many of these all over. And I've looked into these in the past, and there's a lot of overlapping with the 7 gods, 7 planets, 7 days of the week. There's lots of overlap, lots of minor divergences, but one that is always there is pride.
It's part of the self-forgetfulness. Meghann.
Yeah, there's just something also that feels important to me to add into this of, it's just a lens. I hold it as a lens, right? And so in any assessments that we use, you're sort of given a report of what your type is. Only you know what feels right.
Mhm.
And often there is that, like, I'm going to throw up. That's how you know. If you get your report and you're like, yeah, it's probably not the right type, right? But at the end of the day, it's a lens. And so I also try not to say I am a 7. I sort of, I work with myself as a 7, right? But it's hard to remember to do that. We all slip up. And but there's something to the humility of that, right? Of just sort of only the person I'm working with knows their truth and knows what's helpful for them. And sometimes it's not helpful, so then we don't use it. But when it is helpful, it's very, very helpful. But we all have sort of, to remember that it's just a tool.
Just a tool.
And I love that sort of for me, it's like, but it's also, the tool I'm fascinated with. And then there's that, if it's helpful, that this aspect of, the core motivation of the 7 to live life fully. And then when you layer in this social instinct of how's the group doing? What's good for the group? Do I belong in the group? That's in Enneagram terms, a counterphobic, the instinct of the social and the instinct to live life fully don't go together. They're actually in opposition. And so that's where somebody like me gets drawn to big visions, like helping women to stop, die in childbirth, because I really want to do something for the good of the group. But then underneath that, I'm my core motivation to live life fully. There's sort of this sneaky selfishness. And so this map, seeing it in this way, really helped me work with myself, because that felt like a trap I kept tripping on that I didn't understand. And getting that object was so very helpful. And I think that's the way I really relate with this tool, is when we go really, really deep in it, it gives us this path to work with ourselves really skillfully. But then I believe also when we really do that, then we get to a point where we don't need the map in that way, right? That's sort of this consciousness development.
Exactly. It's the scaffolding disappears in time. But I will say, as Carol said, there are principles which govern the universe. There are laws which govern the universe. I believe the golden rule is one of those laws. And the golden rule is a win-win approach to relationships. And the Enneagram is a win-win approach to relationships. But so much of our world is transactional. As Buber said, so much of our relationships are I-it relationships. And as a result, we do great injustice to one another. We create great scenes of violence. And so the Enneagram provides us with those patterns, which I believe, and this is what I was taught by Russ and Dawn, I believe we carry those patterns through our life and beyond. And that, again, there's been a team that's been fielded, and everybody on that team. So if you look at corporate America, my brother was head of YPO International, which are all these incredible, powerful, dominant personalities, usually white, old males. I resemble that statement. They don't bring the introverts. They don't bring the 4s into the conversation. They want the 5s there. They want the 3s there to get the detail done. But they don't want the 9s, and they can't stand being around a 9.
Yeah, or the 6s.
Or the 6s. because
Or the
again,
fours.
there's a quality of tension. But this is the beauty of reality, is that tension is built into the framework. And that creativity, as you pointed out, Carol, the law of three, the Tao becomes one, the one becomes the two become the three, and the three becomes everything. Chapter 42, Lao Tzu.
Everything is the ancestor of the Tao. From the mother of all being, the one is born, which brings forth the two. The two mothers the three, from which the 10,000 things are born. Thus, through the Tao, the great cycles of being are complete.
So that law of three is, I think, a law that governs everything. And when we see that, then we can align ourselves with those laws. As I tell my students at university, if you try to walk off the top of this 5-story building, the law of gravity is going to get you every time. And whether the jar hits the rock or the rock hits the jar, it's bad for the jar. So again, there are laws here which I think govern. And the law of 7 is fascinating, as Russ pointed out. If you divide 7 into 1, you get a repeating pattern. Carol, you want to share that pattern?
That pattern is 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7.
Into infinity.
Yeah.
It repeats infinitely.
Hmm.
And the law of 3 never gets you to 1. It gets you to 0.99999. In other words, there's infinite mystery associated with all this. There's a quality, as you say, Meghann, a filter through which we can begin to function in life and function well if we follow the energy. But we can fall into the trap of typecasting. We can fall into the trap of the poison. And that's, Eric, where the lack of humility creates a problem. I will tell you an Enneagram story. So my father was a 3. He was a very powerful personality. When he walked into the room, everybody turned their head. He had a lot of energy. So he was at dinner one night with 3 married couples. One of the married couples was Danny Kaye and his wife. The other married couple was Danny Thomas and his wife. And the other married couple was Red Skelton and his wife. 3 of the greatest comedians of all time, right, Carol?
Yes.
So when dessert is served, my father gets up and he starts telling jokes. He stands up and starts telling jokes. The 3s are about self-image. And Danny Thomas leans over to Danny Kaye and he says, "Who the hell is this civilian?" But again, there is, with every type, there is a proclivity to fall asleep, as Carol said, and to fall back into that ego structure. But as Joseph Campbell said, you've got to have one to get rid of one. So understanding the ego is really an important step in the journey.
The other big piece is that the Enneagram helps you to understand other people and have great compassion for them, especially when you look at yourself and you see, when you look at your own type and understand what your journey looks like, where you've come from and where you're going, it gives you much more, you cut people much more slack. And hopefully you learn to understand other people. And then once you understand other people, then you can actually love other people. And the Enneagram is wonderful for helping you look at others with compassion, love, and understanding, so that we get along better in this world.
I tell you, when I saw my siblings and my parents, my compassion just went through the roof. So we have some additional questions here. Here's a question. Can you please talk about my dear friend Mary, who is in our class, right, Dana?
That's correct.
Can you talk about the wings? Is it possible to have 2 wings?
Can I jump in on this one?
Yes, please do.
The way I've been taught to use the wings is, we need to have 2 wings. Airplanes, birds fly better with 2 wings. We have 2 wings. some of the deep Enneagram theory I find super interesting is that, you know, our type is sort of formed by being in a dilemma with the wings. So as a type 7, I have an 8 wing to be in control, to be strong, to not be vulnerable. And I have a 6 wing to be safe, to find safety. So how do I be in control and find safety? I'll go towards joy. I'll just live fully. And so you can kind of do that same dilemma with all of the wings. And the idea is one will probably be more comfortable for us. For me, my 8 wing is more comfortable. And the growth journey is to sort of fully integrate both of those and to recognize that we have easy access to those energies. And as we explore them, we can sort of it's sort of a different dimension of the growth journey.
I think that our goal is to integrate so that we have all of the energies within us. If you would look at the gifts of the Enneagram, you want to have all the gifts within you, all of the energies. And that's what happens with growth. As we go on and learn more and transform or get transformed, we have transformation, then all of those kinds of energies are available to us, and we work with all of them. That's the goal.
Yeah. And integration or growth is really a function of the dynamic nature of the Enneagram. So as a 9, my growth comes from going to the 3, which is where I find action. I need action to get me out of my room, from beneath my covers, into the world and doing things. And when I'm in stress or when I'm in trauma, I fall back into the 6, which is a place of fear, a place of uncertainty. It's in the mind, and there's a lot of anxiety there. How's that for you as 7s? Where is your growth and where is your stress?
As I'm looking at the layout of the various Enneagram positions and numbers, are the wings always the ones adjacent to it?
Mm-hmm.
So a 7 has a 6 and 8, but on the diagram here, it's connected to the 7 is connected to the 5
And the 1.
and the 1.
Yeah.
What are those?
What
That's
I just
what Gard
talked
was
about.
just speaking to. Yeah. So those are called the lines, or the vertical growth of development.
And don't we have all of these inside us? I mean, we're not just a 3 or a 7 or a what have you. And you know, when I've taken some of these personality evaluation tests, and I did take this one, and are they all the same? If I took one Enneagram, am I always going to be a 7? I mean, I turned out to be a 7 myself today.
Really? That's so funny.
Well, I will say I'm biased to certain assessments. Some assessments are better than others.
But would I wouldn't be some, if one's showing me to be a 7, I wouldn't be a 3, would I?
Oh, 7s and 3s are very similar, and sometimes
similar?
you can mistype. It is easy to mistype yourself. That's why the quality of the test that you take is very, very important.
Yeah, yeah. And then, you know, it's really testing against your own experience. Does that core motivation, does that really resonate with you? And for me, and I'll let Gard and Carol answer in their own way, there's a way that when the idea is that we come with this core motivation, and that's what we really came to get wise about. That's how it makes sense to me. And when we sort of do that growth through that lens and we really integrate, then I think it becomes available to really connect with all of the energies and all of the energies in us. But we have to do that growth with our core, our core type and our core motivation before that really becomes available.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of some assessments are better than others, but really, truly, only you know. Even the best assessment, you can be mistyped, and you can just sort of, only you know when it really, really lands.
Yeah.
And one of the rules is you never, ever tell a person what their type is. It is a process of self-discovery. And you can facilitate that self-discovery, but you don't want to short circuit it. It's called spiritual bypassing, and it's not healthy.
When I've taken like the Myers-Briggs or Carol Pearson's PMAI or one of those, I'm never surprised. I mean, I'm an ENFP. No surprise. I'm an extrovert. I'm an extrovert, intuitive, a feeling, perceiving type. I'm not analytical. I don't care about right answers, none of that stuff. I wasn't surprised when I read what a 7 was, but I frankly, in looking at the descriptions, thought I was probably more over on the 3 side. I'm risk tolerant. I'm not risk averse, and the things that do it. I will say I didn't care for some of the questions and the way they phrased it. It's like, would you rather be eaten by a python or devoured by a snowstorm or something? I don't know.
Well, what happens, Dana, in time is you begin to, well, if you've ever been to a conference, which some of the attendees here have, and the 9s get together on the stage, it's like spooky scary. Because we just all behave very similarly. And I'm sure the 7s, it's the same way. It's like, oh my God, you do that too?
That's why the use of panels is so helpful sometimes.
It really is. Also, because I think like getting at this layer of that core motivation, because in different cultures and different social structures, things can look really different. Like I was recently working with an organization, and there was a Black man who was identifying as an 8. He didn't seem 8 to me. And so I was just sort of curious about it. He really felt this conviction that that was his type. And then when I was working with him and connecting with him, I realized that a classic 8 strategy of coming in and being harsh and telling people what to do is not safe for a Black man in North America. And so the way that he exerted his control and his power looked different, but he knew that was his motivation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Have there been studies about people who are the leaders in corporations or athletes or actors about what types they tend to be?
Yes. And it's fascinating because the people who run politics, the military, corporate America are generally 8s and 3s. And they don't want introverts in the boardroom.
Yeah.
They only want the powerful. And I noticed that with my brother, who's an 8. If you walked into his office, you'd see him with George W. Bush. You'd see him with Madeleine Albright, pictures of them on the wall. And it's like they don't like hanging out with 9s because we are perceived as weak. And they don't want anything to do with weakness. And it's what Meghann said earlier. There's a lack of vulnerability. So Brene Brown, this vulnerability issue, this is for all of us on the Enneagram issue, is really diving deep and looking at the tough stuff inside of us. And for me as a 9, to be able to stand up to my brother and say, well, wait a second. Or as Carol would tell me to say, yes, Jimmy, I hear you. And let me share with you my perspective.
Well, part of being vulnerable, even if you are a command and take charge type, is being vulnerable and trusting your type. That vulnerability and trust go together. And being able to open up to the fact and the way you are might, instead of enrage that archetype, it might diminish it and allow you to be more humble. And rather than walking in and being the type A in the room, you would walk in and you would say, okay, I know what's going on, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay back and I'm going to let others take charge, because if the boat starts flooding, I can get us out of here, but let's see what everybody else has to say.
Yeah, and that's why in a boardroom, the ideal boardroom, you'd have all the numbers around the table. Yeah. But as Rizzo and Hudson say, there's healthy levels, there's super healthy, and there's unhealthy. And there's been a tie into the DSM to show what happens in the unhealthy when those qualities really go off the rail. And I can see that in my family, and it's fascinating.
And there was a question about this with other tools that I just wanted to touch on. The reason I love this tool is because it's developmental. if we're looking at Myers-Briggs, it's really helpful in how we communicate. A lot of the tools, insights, discs, it's a lot about how we communicate, strategies, a little bit of self-awareness for sure, but then also how do we use this to work better together? Whereas the Enneagram does that, but it adds this piece of our development that I really, really love. So that when, say that 8 in the room, because this is a lot, what we see in organizations, recognizes that this is their development to see their impact on others. There's a level of that vulnerability of taking that in and then choosing to sit back as their own growth and development, not just a tactic for better communication. And then they're probably doing it at home with their spouse, with their kids, wherever, right?
Yeah. And that developmental level, that's that horizontal plane where it's our engagement with the world. It's our engagement with other people. It's how we show up in the world. What's our role to play? But there's another aspect of it developmentally, which is moving beyond the mask, which is moving to our basic essence, which again can be called in many different traditions, many different names. I don't really care, as I tell my students. All I care about is that you have an experience of it. So when we begin to see that vertical line of development along with the horizontal line of development, then we've got a hero's journey or a heroine's journey that's extraordinary. And I tell my students, when you begin to see the synchronicity, serendipity, and synergy showing up in your life, those two dimensions are coming together. And there's a quality of joy, as you said, Meghann.
Can I tell a funny story about the lines?
Please.
So I have 2 kids, and because I hold it lightly, but I do work with my kids with their Enneatype that I feel in them. And I felt it in utero, in their birth. I work with my son as a 5, and he had this really quiet birth. He sort of was in there figuring it out himself. By the time I knew I was in labor, and called the midwife, he was coming. So I caught him myself in the birth tub. And he's now 5, and I still help him in the bathroom. So I'm telling this story because the 7 has a line to 5. So the way I work with lines is that we have a line of release and a line of stretch. So the 7 goes to the 5, which is about research, slowing down. A practice when working with a 7 client is often like, do your dishes at half speed. Slow down, turn internally. How do you feel? Gather more information. And my son, as a 5, always asks me to wipe his butt slow like a slug.
Oh, Jesus.
He's my line of integration. He asks me to move at half speed.
Meghann, that is quite a story.
Thank you. Yes.
We are actually recording this, and someday when he's 25, he's going to hear this story. But Carol, do you have any stories as a 7, just humorous or otherwise, that I know we've talked a lot about feeling in 7s?
I was so blind. People, 7s are an assertive type. And people would always, when I was teaching or something, this is years ago, they would say, "Oh, you're so mean. You're coming," and I would go, "What? There's not a bone in my body that feels like I'm mean at all." And I did not understand that I was being very assertive to people. It's just part of how I used to operate. So when I had to sort of take a step back and wipe my butt slowly so that I could say, well, what am I doing that is causing these people to have this reaction to me, which I certainly didn't intend. And once I began to understand how people meet people who are assertive, then I was able to say, I don't have to be that way. I can take a breath, take a little step back, and try to find ways of giving them what they need rather than me asserting myself upon them. And that was a huge lesson for me. Because, I was one of those people that said, this is how I am, and this is what you're going to get. No. And I think it was my contemplative practice that softened my heart, actually opened my heart. To be able to say, okay, I don't have to have all my stuff up in their face. What is it that they need from me? And then make a judgment about how to respond to them in an authentic way, by the way. I'm not talking about inauthenticity, but because I would have to find that place in myself where I could care and give what they needed. Yeah.
There seems to be an element of fear in each one of these, that a one is a fear of being a bad person. Three is fear of being worthless. Four is fear of having no identity. Five is fear of being useless. Six, fear of being abandoned. Seven, fear of being deprived or missing out. Eight, fear of being controlled. Nine, fear of loss. I mean, these are fear of loss of connection with others. And these were just notes that I was making. I missed two, fear of being unwanted and unloved. It seems to me, first off, a fear always is fear of something. It needs an object. You can't just have a universal fear that it's outwardly focused. And so how do we reconcile, if these are true, and we all have some apprehensions about who we are and what we're doing in the world, and we overcome those through a variety of different behaviors or strategies or motivations or what have you. It seems to me to have a kind of I'll use the word guardedly, but a negative orientation, that it builds a positive strategy as part of the solution for it. Is there any truth in that?
Well, I think, when Meghann talked about the three instincts, the instinct of self-preservation is really the fundamental instinct of all life. I want a roof over my head. I want to be fed. I want to be taken care of. I'm a self-pres 9. But there's also an instinct of belonging, the will to belong, which is the sexual instinct. And there's also an instinct of gratification, which is the connection instinct. All of those are biologically implanted in our operating system.
Mm-hmm.
All of those, we know from the neuroscience, are a function of our amygdala. But what recent neuroscience shows, Abigail Marsh at Georgetown and others, is the amygdala is also the source of altruism, compassion, and love.
Mm-hmm.
And when you explore and you look at kidney donors who don't know who they're giving it to, they have larger amygdalas. And what we know is that you can grow your amygdala, neuroplasticity, you can grow the amygdala, you can grow these functions. So that's why the spiritual piece is so important, because we begin to move from that biological, instinctually driven operating system, which none of us would be here if we didn't have those fears, those anxieties, and those angers. But now we're in a position where we are in crisis. The globe itself is in crisis. We are challenged to transcend those instincts and to transform, if you will, fear into love, anxiety into peace, and anger into peace, and anxiety into joy. And as I share with my students, those qualities of peace, joy, and love, those are our birthright. That's the essence of who we are. So we're not negating ourselves. We're just asking ourselves self-inquiry. We're asking ourselves, could we transcend those basic instincts which are hardwired into our being, our DNA, in a way that allows us to be compassionate, loving, and hopeful people? Does that make sense, Dana?
It does. To follow up on your Field of Dreams story at the beginning, the core construct in that movie, as I remember it, was if you build it, they will come. And we all know that whether it's language or love or some sense of spirituality, first we build that, and then that thing that we build begins to build us.
Yes.
Whatever we take the time to invest ourselves in, then feeds back and nurtures and supports us.
Yes, we have to take responsibility for building our baseball field, our container. And then once we begin to do that, we can see that we can help others. So as a peacemaker, I can step in where there's conflict and I can say, well, yes, Carol, I hear what you're saying, but let me tell you what Meghann just said. And it's a pretty interesting perspective as well. And we can bring all of these gifts onto the field of dreams, and we can create a container in which everybody can be seen. Jews and Palestinians, Ukrainians and Russians, everybody can be seen and everybody can be valued.
So how do you then take a person who, whether through environmental circumstance or just one of the numbers that they happen to feel like they were born into, to trust, to love, when the world doesn't seem like a very trusting, loving place? What baby steps would you recommend that you could talk with somebody about? Like, I'm thinking of young preschool kids and elementary school kids, and giving them the confidence to go up to the other person on the playground and say, I'd like to play with you. And you know, if you're an introvert, that's a real difficult thing to do. For me as an extrovert, I can tell you, it's not a problem at all.
Right.
You know, I have my own demons, but I found that if you can help people become who they are, everybody has got something inside them that's kind of racking them up. So how do you teach people to trust? What do you recommend doing?
I do it every semester with my students. I tell them, I'm teaching you a philosophy class. Maybe it's Chinese philosophy, Indian philosophy, world religions. It doesn't really matter the class. I tell them this is really a game show. And behind door number one is fear, anxiety, and anger. And those are our biological instincts. And behind door number two is love, joy, and peace. And then I ask them the question. I say, here's your first examination in my class. Which door do you prefer? And by the way, don't raise your hand if it's one. See me after class, right? And I tell them your birthright is door number two. And that's what the Enneagram really teaches at its core, is that we are essentially, as Carol said beautifully, we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And so can we find our way to that? And what you need to do is you need to develop some practices. So we always take 3 minutes of silence at the beginning. I teach them feng shui, I teach them tai chi, I teach them meditation techniques, loving kindness, metta. I teach them various contemplative practices. And I say, I don't care what you practice as long as you practice.
Mm-hmm.
And what the fascinating thing is that when they begin to practice, by about mid-semester, I see the lights go on in their eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's happening right now in my class in world religion. And they're coming up and saying, I'd like to see that book on the Enneagram. Maybe I'd like to do my research paper on it. Or I'd like to see that book on awe that Dr. Keltner wrote that talks about the 8 wonders of awe and how important
Mm-hmm.
this is, which Carl Jung said is the only thing that really heals. And so the lights go on and they begin to trust the possibility that door number 2 is their birthright. And they can arc, as Dara Marks would say in her wonderful book, Inside Story. It's an arc of transformation. And as Thomas Keating suggests, there are 2 actions that occur in contemplative practice. One is healing the wounds of a lifetime trauma, which we all have. And 2 is transformation, as Carol pointed to that beautiful butterfly.
Well, it seems to me that what you really want to do is teach people to find vulnerability within themselves, wherever that vulnerability happens to be. Go down that path, because at the end of that path is the openness that will connect their soul to their life purpose, to the whole divine nature of existence. But without being vulnerable, I don't know how you awaken trust, because to me, trust doesn't come through the paths of validation or affirmation or reward or understanding or anything. It comes from opening yourself up to that whole notion of risk and being vulnerable and need and desire.
Yeah, I mean, Meghann put it beautifully. For different clients, right, Meghann, you have different strategies. For the person
Yeah.
who's a sensate, let's take a walk by the river. For the person who's an intuitive, let's sit down and do a quiet, silent meditation.
Yeah.
It's different portals that we walk through, but eventually, as Jung said, it's a labyrinth that carries us around. So eventually we're walking by the river, we're meditating, we're singing songs, we're playing the guitar. Yeah. Go ahead,
And
Meghann.
that's where I think that it's a beautiful question, Dana. And I think that sort of the Enneagram gives us a skillful way in, right? If for a friend of mine has a son who feels to me very sick, he's very concerned with safety. He's, and so it would be easy to respond to him of like, don't worry about it. Stop thinking about it. It's no big deal, right? But for him, he really does to feel safe. He needs to have that empathy of, right, this is a big deal. Here's you're concerned about this. And look, it was so brave. You did this thing. To work skillfully with him to help him have that safety and start building that trust is going to be really different than my daughter, who feels very 8. She'd walk up to any kid on the playground. Do you want to play? They'd say no. She's like, okay, she'd find another one. But for her, it's like if she gets embarrassed, it's a really big deal. She really needs a lot of sensitivity around that and to help her see how big she is and how much her impact is on people. So there's sort of a skillful, I think, lens that it offers for the snowflake of how we each are.
Don't you think that since we live in a world of contexts and symbols, that you mentioned Jung with the labyrinth, and it strikes me that with the labyrinth, you have a place on the ground and you don't need to understand it, you need to do it. You put the first foot out and the next one after that, and you let the path reveal what it pulls out of you after that, and let the path do the talking and you do the listening.
Yeah. I mean, the beauty of the labyrinth, going back to Eric's initial question about humility, is, you're walking into the labyrinth and you're getting really damn close to the center right away. And then the labyrinth throws you right out to the edge. And isn't that like life?
I wanted to ask a question. Is there been work to connect the Enneagram with astrology, or do you in your own life see connections? And you said a little bit about how different typologies can overlap and reinforce each other and be different and teach us different things about one another. But yeah, astrology, is this a direction that the Enneagram goes?
I don't have any experience with that. Meghann, do you have any experience?
I just know that I work with IEQ 9. They have an assessment that I quite like, and they're doing research on it right now. All the Enneagram books are written by type 5s. And he's a type 5 doing research on the connection between the Enneagram and astrology. And I have a friend who's an astrologist who does lots of connections. So I don't think there's a lot published yet, but it is a super interesting question that people are investigating more. That's my awareness. Yeah.
What is your astrological sign, Meghann?
I'm a Scorpio.
What's yours, Dana?
Gemini.
And I'm a Capricorn. So there you go.
There's that.
There's that.
Well, we don't know what our instincts are, though. Okay, so let's just.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
It occurs to me, I remember the pat phrase going around Pacifica when you and I were going through Pacifica was, that's a good dissertation topic. And I think that if somebody, like I made a note today, astrology's got 12 categories. Myers-Briggs has got 16. Carol Pearson's got 12. Enneagram's got 9. The Holland Code, which ironically, I don't know how much any of you know about the Holland Code, but it was used by the Department of Labor. I mean, it may still be the one that they use, but it's to try to find out career work patterns of people and how they ought to work, whether you like to work with teams or inside or outside and all that kind of stuff. It's the thing that they use. But it seems to me that taking a step back and looking at the kaleidoscope way that these things are all letting light through would be a very invaluable study for somebody who would be going through a doctoral research program like Pacifica or something like that, to kind of like show the commonalities and, you know, the various ways that they line up. Is the Enneagram, I won't say it's not being seriously considered, but Myers-Briggs and Carol Pearson, the PMII, are both right out there in terms of their use with a lot of institutions and things like that. Is the Enneagram, does it have that level of application in the public?
I do believe it does. You know, more and more people who are discovering it are realizing, hey, this is a tool that's really been beneficial in my life. And again, I want to say, you know, centering prayer, the vertical, Enneagram, the horizontal, those two tools have been the most instrumental tools in my life for transformation. And I'm greatly appreciative. And I will tell you, when we were at Woodstock and we were doing the holotropic breathing, I don't know, Will, have you ever done holotropic breathing?
No, I wish.
With Stan
It's a
Grof?
trip.
No, Stan
No, I
Grof,
haven't.
Stan Grof developed this after LSD was outlawed. But when you saw the individuals who were in the room and you'd be paired with somebody, so I'd be paired with Dana, Dana would do the holotropic breathing, and most of the people were tortured.
Yeah.
They were twisting, they were yelling, they were screaming. And on the surface, they looked very calm, very collected, very cool. But underneath is this sort of volcanic energy that's really been deeply traumatized. I will share, Meghann, Carol, that my partner, when I did the holotropic breathing, I was on the ground lying down, and she said, Gard, you did it wrong. You were giggling. I said, I'm glad I wasn't doing what they were doing. But what you realize is that most people are carrying a tremendous load, a tremendous amount of trauma. And it's, as we learn from Hubble and Gabor Mate and others, it's not just our personal, it's not just our collective trauma, it's our genetic trauma, it's our DNA. And so again, these tools are meant to create that quality of transformation. A caterpillar has no clue that someday it could be a butterfly, but that's the reality of it. So again, going back to Einstein's cosmogenetic principle, there are three principles: unity, diversity, and growth. Or you could use the word individuation. And unity is allied with the value of love. When we love, we feel more connection, more unity with the other and with the whole. When we are contemplating diversity, the value is compassion. When we see the diversity around us, when we see the quality of trauma around us, the only possible response is compassion. And then with respect to growth or individuation, it is, as Edie Eger, the Holocaust survivor, in his book, The Choice, says, it's hope. It's hopefulness. It's a possibility that there's a way forward. And those three values actually lead into what I call the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights is that we all have a right to be, to exist with a quality of respect. And second, we all have a right to belong. We all have a right to belong to the widest circle, as Rilke says, the widest circle of humanity. And third, we all have the right to become just who we were intended to become. And I think on all three notes, the Enneagram strikes a chord of resonance on all three notes. And if we could begin to garner that quality of vision, we will be creating that field of dreams. And when we create that field of dreams, the invisibles will show up in ways that we never suspected. Synchronicity, serendipity, synergy will emerge in our lives in ways that we will begin to giggle and be joyful. And we will begin to see that a new humanity is emerging, and the institutions will be shifting, but a new humanity is emerging, which is a humanity which understands that we are, as Alan Watts said, spiritual beings having a human experience.
And I think, if I may say this, that we live in an extraordinary time at this point. And if you look at the law of seven, there are certain shock points that happen where there is a shift that is needed. And we are at one of those points, I believe, and to use Gurdjieff's work, where humanity is under such stress right now. Everyone I talk to is overwhelmed and depressed and not certain about the future. And so we're at a point where the consciousness needs to rise. And I think that the Enneagram is a wonderful tool to help people to find that place where they can raise their level of consciousness by working on themselves, by allowing love to penetrate, by overcoming things such as trauma in their lives. And look at, if you look at what's happening now on the internet, there is more work on trauma happening than ever before, ever. And people realize how traumatized everybody is in this world, and that it needs to, and that we need to work on it, and that we need to deal with the trauma in a significant way. And these are things that are happening now because we are at that really, at that shock point where things could go either way. And all you have to do is read the news or watch TV to know that things could go right now either way. So it's really key and important at this point in time that people find their own center, that people learn how to belong and become and be, that we raise our own individual level of consciousness in order to combat the insanity that is our world at this point in time.
Yeah, and Jung, for those of us that know his story, Jung had very clear premonitions of World War I. You know, if you're familiar with his biography, you know he had those dreams. Well, at the end of his life, he had dreams of an apocalypse. And I believe we're living in an apocalyptic time. So you, Dana, and I, and Mary, and others took the course on apocalypse. And apocalypse is a time, right? I'm looking at you, Meghann. Apocalypse is a time where more civilians are being killed than combatants, right? And that's what's happening right now.
So if you were motivated out of either curiosity or circumstance, where would you go? How would you recommend? How would you recommend just availing yourself of a reasonable approach to find out? Would you take a test? How do you, what would you do?
Well, I would ask first what my motivation is. What do I really want? In India, it's called Jnana Yoga. Who am I? Do I really want to know the answer to that question? If I really want to know the answer to that question, then I'm going to do what I can to find out. And whether it's YouTube or a book or going to Woodstock, New York, I don't care what it is, I'm going. And so, again, I would just say to each and every individual, follow your heart. People show up. There are coaches out there like Meghann who do this work with people every day. I had a therapist for several years, very helpful to me, very helpful in the process of transformation. So at different points along the way, there are different modalities that are required. But I would first ask that question of Brene Brown, which is, am I really interested in this question? Or is this, and I would tell you, Carol and Meghann, I gave an Enneagram seminar at UCLA one time, and we did a really quick test. And guess what? 3/4 of the audience showed up as 7s. I really want to know about this. This is really interesting. I'm really fascinated by this, right? So, I mean, you can show up as a 7 and you can be fascinated and you can follow the pleasure principle in relation to this, but this is much deeper. This is about our true selves. And if we don't have that question of wanting to really know ourselves, then start looking around, because you need to realize you need to know yourself. We need to create that field of dreams, and you are the only one that's going to
Mhm.
do that.
You're the only one that knows where it is and how to build it. I'm involved, as you know, in a series of labyrinth endeavors as a result of having done a Myth Salon on labyrinths. And I can easily imagine that this would, take seed and hold in a similar sort of way, because people write to me and they say, well, I suffer from what Chris Holmes calls fascinated by everything. I mean, and that's one of the attractions that Will and I have is we have a boundless opportunity ahead of us in this Myth Salon. And we're doing things like we have one where we're going to do one on artificial intelligence. And then we have one where we're going to be doing the revisioning of the American psyche. All of this plays into a level of spiritual inquiry. You first ask the question, if we can encourage what the ancient said at Delphi, know thyself, find out, what's going on. I mean, it all starts with that kind of path of inquiry.
Yeah, and the other ancient Heraclitus said, character is destiny.
Mm-hmm.
And the bottom line at this point is we can look around and we can see in politics and economics and the social arenas a tremendous deficit in character.
Mhm.
I'm really
Well,
compelled by the idea that the Enneagram is something that's still being studied. You talk about an individual pursuing an interest on their own to make sense of it, but it sounds like it's also a journey for experts to continue to develop it. And it's exciting to think about what might be figured out in the next, decades around it. And what's compelling about that to me is that mirrors a journey that we're all on. This spiritual journey you're talking about, as we all come into increased consciousness. Part of it, there are lots of little pieces of it: awakening of our relationship with nature, etc., world religions, etc., all these different things. But the Enneagram, it sounds like from what Carol said, that it started with an adventure around the world to make sense of all these different esoteric traditions. And it seems like that's in some ways the project that it always will be. It will always continue to be that project if it is the case that people are still open to looking at astrology or another system to continuously add to it and make more sense of it. So I'm especially interested in that, just the fact that it is in process with us as we are in process,
Mhm.
as we explore ourselves. And it seems like it's playing a part in that larger journey.
Yeah.
And the mystery never ends. And I would say, Dana, there's a plethora of subjects out there. But when you learn geometry, you learn that there are certain basic axioms that drive all of reality. And as I tell my students, this field of dreams, there's really 4, maybe 5 fundamental axioms. One is that matter exists, that we have bodies.
mm-hmm.
And 2, I ask my students, mind also exists. If any of you didn't bring your mind in, raise your hand, right? Which will be proof that you did bring your mind in. So mind exists. So that's another fundamental assumption. And when we say axiom, it's not something I can prove. I can't prove matter. We know that philosophically. I can't prove mind. I can't prove the third axiom, which is spirit. And spirit is related to values. Matter is related to facts. It's related to the sciences. Mind is the integration of those two realities. And then you have this fourth axiom, which is personality. And that's why at a very young age, I was fascinated, and I'm still fascinated by the mystery of personality, is to dive and keep diving deeper and deeper and deeper, because the mystery, the numinous, the awe never evaporates for one who's truly diving with a quality of humility. And as we dive, again, we begin to see the synchronicities and serendipities and synergies emerging in our life. And there's a quality of joy that begins to emerge. And I do believe it's correct. All the traditions suggest joy is inherent in human existence. It is our birthright. It is the infallible sign of the divine. Those axioms are really the most interesting topics for me in this journey.
Do you think that faith and vulnerability and trust all work together?
Yeah, I think faith is assuming those axioms are real.
Mhm.
And trust is basically acting upon those axioms to see how it works out. And then assurance is the reality of love and joy and peace, which emerges from that trust over a period of time. I used to tell my folks at the church, I used to say, you know, if you ever meet a minister who's a kind of angry minister, who's a kind of anxious minister, you need to ask some questions. Because again, spiritual formation is what it's all about. That's what coaching is about. That's what communication is all about. It's
Mhm.
about becoming who we were intended to become.
Mm,
And why take the journey
Mm.
with somebody who doesn't know the territory?
mm,
Why take the journey with somebody who doesn't exhibit a quality of joy, quality of peace, quality of love in their life?
One of the things that comes out of the 7 that I noticed over here was gratitude. And I will say, of all of the things that I could have been grateful for coming out of Pacifica was meeting you.
mm,
I really have, I have no, I will say this to you, and I've said it to you any number of times, out of all of our class of brilliant people, why you picked me to go forth with you. And I look at all of the things that we've done and continue to do. Um, and I'm very grateful for that. I mean, I've made myself vulnerable to that, and there's just a deep trust between the two of us. So I want to express my gratitude for you bringing in, Meghann and Carol today. I mean, just wow. I mean, I didn't know what to expect, but I thought that this Enneagram would make good content for a Myth Salon. And rather than just like populate it with a lot of faces, Will and I have just put ourselves at the mercy of your wisdom. And I really feel that we are the beneficiaries of that and have to thank you for just generously sharing what it is that this Enneagram is about.
Well, I want to give Carol and Meghann the last word, Dana, if that's okay.
Please do.
And I want to say, as my dissertation advisor, Rick Tarnas, would say, 2 good women are equal to 1 good man. Divine feminine is what is going to allow this new container, this field of dreams to emerge. So, Meghann, will you give us your final thought?
I just want to say thank you. This was really fun. I really, really, really enjoyed the rich perspectives and like looking at it in different angles. And I wanted to come back to that great question you asked, Dana, if somebody, wants to go further in this and echo Gard of, follow that impulse inside of you, wherever that takes you. And with the Enneagram, really apply it to yourself deeply first is a great place for it to start having traction. And I recommend not doing a free test online. There are really good assessments out there, and there are certified coaches like me who can help you like apply it to yourself. And I do really recommend that.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Amen.
Carol?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you,
Yes.
Meghann.
I, 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 I'm just grateful for this whole thing. I'm grateful for each one of you. I've had a wonderful time here, and I just want to say, onward, march on, have some faith, and trust your gut, and go forth and do it, whatever that means for you. And I think that having that joy, that there is joy available within, as you said, Gard. And I think that that's a message that people need at this point in time, because there's just not a whole lot of joy out there in this world. But it is available within each one of us. And I think that our decisions, sincerity paves the way for finding out what lies ahead and who you are.
Yeah, and the joy is important, but I also say we do this for the innocents.
Mhm.
Do this for the blood and the bones that cry out from the earth, for the children of Gaza, for the children of Israel, for the children of Ukraine, for the children of Russia, for the children of so many countries in Africa. as Gandhi said, there's enough for everybody's need, but not for everybody's greed. So we do this because this is the revolution. Compassion, as the Dalai Lama said, is the revolution of this moment. So let us be revolutionaries in a revolutionary way.
Amen.
Let's have one moment of silence before we go forth. Thank you all. Thank you.
Another
Thank
good
you
one.
so much. Beautiful.
Thank you,
See
Carol.
I'll see you all
Gard,
soon.
thank you.
It's wonderful to meet both of you. And Gard, I'll see you again soon.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody.